here we are at the bench. We have all of our projects cut to their final length, and we are going to work on our front and back. On our print here, our front and back both have this little notch cut out of them, so we're going to work on that notch right now. In our directions here, in our binder, Gumball machine directions, it says to tape our front and back. They're 4.5 inches long. Tape them together and mark the middle up towards the top where that notch is going to be. So let's do that now. We're just going to stack these two on top of each other. Make the ends flush. They should be the exact same size. So we're going to make the ends flush. If they're not the same size, make sure one edge is flush, and then we'll trim them up later. So make sure everything's flush. We're going to tape these together. We're going to put one roll of tape around this edge and another roll of tape around this edge. Leave the middle open because we're going to cut that out with the bandsaw. You want to measure your block. Everyone's is probably going to be a little bit different because most likely you struggled cutting it square, and there might be a little bit small. Mine is 4.5 inches, doesn't mean yours is. Measure whatever yours is and divide it in half. So mine is 4.5. Half of 4.5 is 2.25. If yours is 4.25, well, half of 4.25 is 2.125. So just do your math, figure out where center is. We're going to mark that up here near the top. There is center. In our directions, it says next step is to mark to the left and right 3/4 of an inch. So we just did this step. We taped them together. We marked the middle. We're now on this step, which is mark 3/4 on both sides of the center mark. So here, what I'm going to do to make that easier, I'm just going to pick any whole inch number. I'm going to use 6. It doesn't matter which number you use, just use a whole inch number. You're going to go 3/4 of an inch to the left and 3/4 of an inch to the right. Make those two dots. The next step, mark 3/4 of an inch down from the top edge. And if you want to go just a hair past 3/4 of an inch, that's fine, because we need to actually be a little bit deeper anyway so our slide doesn't rub here. But I'm going to measure down 3/4 of an inch, and I'm just going to cut right on my line when I cut. So measure down 3/4 of an inch. I'm going to put it at a whole inch number. I put it on 3 this time. Down 3/4 of an inch is right there. Make a dot. Now we're going to use a square to transfer our lines. We have to make sure that our edges, everything has to be square. If our project's not square and we take a square and measure off of 2 edges, then the shape we're cutting out isn't going to be square at all. So make sure your project is square. Make sure you're measuring off of a square edge. Square this across, down to that dot. There we go. We have our rectangle drawn on here for our slider. It is 3/4 of an inch down from the top, 3/4 to center, 3/4 the other direction. So 1.5 inches across total. Our slide's going to fit in there. Now we did this step here, which is square it across using our square. And then this step just says transfer your lines. Yep, did that. Now we're going to take it to our bandsaw, and we're going to cut on the short 1-inch lines first, or sorry, 3/4 inch lines first, and then we're going to cut at a diagonal from one corner to the opposite corner. That should cut out a triangle-shaped wedge, and then we'll come back in here with the saw, and we'll cut hopefully from that flat across the bottom. If we can't get on that flat, we'll just get as close as we can and saw across. Here we're at the bandsaw. I'm going to cut straight down these two lines. I'm going to cut right on my lines because we actually need this to be slightly larger than 3/4 inch deep and 1.5 inches wide, because we need our slider to fit in there. Our slider measures 3/4 inch tall by 1.5. If we cut the exact same size, our slider's not going to fit. We want it to be slightly bigger so the slide slides through. So I'm going to cut directly down this line here and straight down this line here, and then I'm going to come back and try to cut a diagonal, kind of a curved diagonal here, to make this triangle piece pop off and flop out. Now when we come back in here to cut this flat, we are going to hook our project behind the blade like this and try to run down that straight line across the bottom. And then we might have to come back later on and clean up this corner down here. So get as close as you can to that line, cut across to meet that corner there. This triangle piece should pop out. There we have our notch cut out. As you can see, I cut on my lines, so my lines disappeared. Our next step, according to our directions on our packet, it says mark, before you take your tape off, you're gonna put X's on one of the sides. Doesn't matter which side you pick. I'm gonna put my X's on this side. That tells me when I go to glue this thing together, my X's need to be on the same side. Otherwise, if your notch is slightly off center, your slide isn't going to fit in there, it's going to bind. So I'm going to put my X on these two sides, so when I glue this together, my X's stay on that same side. Here we are back at the bench. We have our front and back cut out, taped together. We have our X's marked on it, saying those two edges go together. We're going to grab our material we have for our slide. We're going to put it into that slot we just cut. Hopefully it fits through that width. If not, we're going to take a file, we're going to put this in a vise, and we're going to sand our slot wider. Or we could take it over to the bandsaw and just trim a sliver off here, but that is very hard to do. If you do try to cut a sliver off, first square a line to cut on a line. If you try to freehand it and guess, you're going to make a squiggly, curvy snake line, and it's not going to look very good. So square a line across. That way you have a straight edge to follow. I don't have that problem. Mine slides right through. So my width is fine, but if you see across the top here, it is flush. And once I get my top glued on and held tight, my piece probably is going to be a little bit too tight, because we are going to sand just a little bit off of the top here later on. I want to make sure I have a little bit more room for this slide to slide through. So again, put this in a vise. You're going to take your file and you are going to file that bottom, take a little bit of material off it. If you can, if you need to take off a lot of material, you could, again, square a line across, go back to the bandsaw, cut to that line. But again, that is hard to do. I am going to quickly go put this in a vise. I might still square a line across and just file to my line. That way I know when to stop. And then we'll be back shortly after I get this thing sanded down so my slide is below the surface. I just took the project, filed a little bit off, and as you can see now, it is a little bit farther below the surface there. There's a little bit of light coming through there. So now that when I glue this together and then I'll sand everything flush, my slide should still slide. Our next project, so we're going to take this all apart and tape our sides, or we're going to glue our sides to it.